Pat, I've got a question. I've got a customer who is looking to move to Azure, and they're currently using somebody else's CDN to serve with dynamic content. Is there a particular pattern or approach you would suggest to replicating that in Azure?
What I would probably do is let's test it, because our CDN is optimized for certain traffic, and it's more important to me that people have a great experience with Azure, not necessarily with all of the features, right? So we do have customers that leverage our blobs and CDNs together, and they have a great experience. We have other customers that leverage our blobs and other CDNs, and they get a great experience. But let's just try it. It's so cheap to try. It's a checkbox, and if it works, great. I think it's simpler and easier, fewer billing, all that great stuff. And if it isn't great, let's make it great for them. And then I want to hear if it's not, so that I can take that back and we can fix it.
Good. Well, I was going through the exercise of just thinking how I would do this in the Azure CDN. So their application currently serves up requested images, requested size dynamically through a CDN.
Right.
I was trying to think how I would do that in Azure. It occurred to me I could have a page they would hit that would see if the requested image and size already was in blob storage, otherwise create it, then redirect.
Yep.
Hitting it through. Do you think that would work?
Yeah, I mean that would work, and also, that kind of feature is what I want to hear about. If that's a scenario that's common, tell me, because I'm shipping stuff every 6 weeks. So, these are, when I get feedback, it goes into a priority just stack rank. The more feedback I get, you just start moving up the stack, right? And like I say, we have a whole dev team who does nothing but CDN feature sets. And if I've got 100 requests for that feature versus 100 requests for some other, it's not that hard decision to make.
So I have a couple of questions related to internet startups and scale in that regard. So my first question is around external dependencies, namely around DNS and SMTP. When you have all the pieces in place, you have a great application and you put it on Azure, but you have perhaps an external DNS provider that can't scale, with the requests.
Yeah.
That's a weak link. How do you mitigate that?
So we've heard the feedback. So in addition to our CDN development team, we actually have a networking infrastructure team that's building out a lot of feature sets. So we are absolutely working on that DNS problem. That is a top priority for us. I don't have a date, but that I can say it is a top priority for us, and we want to get that fixed. Right now, I mean, you're kind of stuck with a CNAME scenario, and it works for the majority of situations. You guys are kind of at the very high-end edge case, but that doesn't mean we don't want to get it working. So that is a priority, and we certainly talk about that somewhere else about some of those features.
My second part was about SMTP.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So SMTP was tricky for us. We actually opted consciously to not have an SMTP server in Azure, and the reason we didn't was we figured that it would be blacklisted almost immediately, because you don't really register your app with Microsoft, and it's tremendous amounts of power that's available to you, right? I mean, you've got the Microsoft network and these massive amounts of cores available to you. I mean, if you really wanted to, you could make an impressive spam engine, right? And so we just chose not to do it that way.
So what's to stop you? What are you doing to prevent somebody from actually doing that?
We don't. We just didn't provide it. So
there's no
if you want to stand up your own SMTP server, go ahead. It absolutely is available to you. But we didn't do it because we just assumed it would be blacklisted virtually. Because everybody's going to show is coming from Azure IP addresses, right? And even within internally into Microsoft, when we're running our own apps, a lot of them have to send mails out. And you run all these procedural issues like, well, what about personal identifiable information, confidentiality, all these other things. And our kind of the pattern that's emerged that really works is go through a trusted relay that you control. So you would have your app running in Azure, and it would go through a trusted relay so that everything is already set and whitelisted and known good, if you will, so you're not kind of in the backscatter of all of these other apps that nobody really knows that much about. And so that is a very common scenario, and we've got some docs on how to do that. So that's one. Another one is really that concept of these hybrid apps where you leave the data or the personally identifiable data running in a data center, not necessarily inside of Azure, and you have the compute running there. It could be that is one of those workloads that's better served coming from there. And again, it's just a question of how do we work with these anti-spam, anti-mail filtering, and it does you no good, even if you're a great app with high value, if you're just being blocked, right? So that's why.
Sounds like there could be a good story there for Exchange Online.
It is. It could be, right? And they absolutely do. Or providing an SMTP server that can do the full registration and I don't know. I used to really keep up with the spam scenarios, but I'm probably 3 years behind, which means I'm basically worthless in a spam discussion right now.
So I have a second question, but that's not related to technology. It's more related to the ecosystem and community of Azure, which you talked about in briefly. So I come from Silicon Valley, and I'm fed up with seeing Web 2.0 startups always looking at the LAMP stack as the only solution. Like looking at the pricing, it's comparable to EC2, etc. I'm wondering, we as a community, what we can do to elevate Azure as a mainstream great platform for Web 2.0 type startups.
Well, actually, there was this great posting on Stack Overflow a couple days ago, and I'm personally a big fan of Stack Overflow, by the way. Speaking of Web 2.0 companies, and it was that exact question came up, and the highest rated answer actually was this very balanced response that if you're Web 2.0, pretty much by definition, you don't have operations staff, you don't have IT staff, you're a few really, really, really smart people with some really great ideas, and you really want to change the world. That's kind of this stereotypical Web 2.0 type thing. And they said, if that's what you have, then that's more or less the sweet spot for Azure. You build your app and use whatever you want to use, PHP or .NET or whatever you're comfortable with, and just publish it up there and then just run it and start iterating, right? And I think what Microsoft, where we could do a better job, is really talking about the breadth of the ecosystem that's available to these developers. Because I think a lot of them say, well, my buddy who's helping me code up my first prototype that I want to go shop around Sand Hill Road, he only knows PHP, so I can't use Azure, right? Or he only knows JScript, or he only knows, whatever. And so they kind of make these assumptions that because I'm not a brilliant .NET developer, I can't use Azure, when actually what our design goal was to say, look, what you choose to program in and what you choose to use for your application should be what's best for you. I want to make sure you just have a scalable, stable, and secure platform that you can build on top of. And for the last few months, we've really been making a big push to get that breadth message out, and we're working on it. It's definitely a work in progress. Whenever I see it or a mention of it, I try and jump on it. And I ask, this really what I need the MVPs really to help me with, because I'm just the one guy.
I'm glad you mentioned
Actually,
Web
1 second, we
2.0.
have one question over here.
So I'm building an app that's going to support 100,000 people. Each of those people are connected through, from their PC to the internet. And I'm using storage, but I need to track the information that goes up and down from each one. I have one Azure account that I'm doing this with.
Right.
What's an architecture that supports the ability to track it? I can build it, but then I have this chaos if I don't know what actually happened.
Right. So there's several ways you can do it, and I'll kind of go from the least amount of Azure resources to the most, maybe. So if you want to do the least amount of Azure resources, and all you want to do is say, I just need to know how much data a given user has posted up, right? Which is kind of this very, very, very baseline. You would just create a container per user.
Right. That I have totally solved.
Right. Okay. But the downside is you don't see any transaction information. You don't see, you don't have a way of filtering, provisioning. I mean, there's a lot of, the difference is the feature versus the app, right? And my advice usually is to really think about maybe doing a reverse proxy. That's really what a web service is there for, just shooting the data through the web service. The web service can scale horizontally and be load balanced. That's great. It talks to the storage in a load balanced way, so you should get equivalent throughput, so the user experience should still be great. And you can still do things like spread them across multiple containers. You could have, that would also give you some options in terms of, well, what if you wanted to create geofencing, where you wanted certain users to go to the Americas and others to Europe, right? It gives you a way of forking these users and inserting in your IP. I think when we look at like the barriers to entry to just a data transfer service, there's not a lot of barriers, right? It's relatively easy to do. But there's tremendous value that you can add once you get the data there, right?
So will I still be able to use the storage API signature?
Absolutely identically, yeah.
So it's just adding a proxy through the web service?
Yeah, and that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is store and forward. I mean, it depends on how much code you want to write. If you just want a very thin veneer, if you will, so you can grab some logging data so that you can do post-processing or billing or whatever, that's the easiest way. If you want to do some other really interesting things like, well, what if I want to provide a dedupe service, or I want to provide an encryption service, or an escrow service, or, you name some data type service, that's your hook, right? You've already got them going through this pipeline, so now all I got to do is branch that pipe, and then I can add these other value-add services, and I don't have to re-architect my clients. For Microsoft, a lot of times the hard part for us is getting the technology installed in the client base. That's actually what drives our cadence on server products and our OS, is how fast can our customers absorb these things. So in the cloud, one of the reasons we do a very, very fast cadence in Azure is we own the deployment, right? So I can deploy every few weeks these updates, and the end clients don't necessarily need to be updated, so I can iterate and expose features and technology much, much faster. Does that make sense? Okay.
So if you're churning every N weeks, how do you know you're not breaking existing apps?
We actually developed a new engineering paradigm specifically for cloud. So we always focus on the end user features, but we don't really spend a lot of time talking about how we get those features built. So we actually started over in terms of how we build products and how we ship products. And the way Azure ships and develops is not the way our other flagship products are built. And it's not the way we build. It's just not it's a completely separate process. And so we came up with this concept of parallel development tracks that are non-blocking. And so I can iterate very, very, very quickly in a non-blocking way, but I can still maintain backwards compatibility and compatibility, and I have these safety spots where I can halt, move forward, roll back, and keep everybody going. But I don't have to, say, synchronize everybody to a single milestone and then go. Because that's actually usually where you spend a lot of extra time, is waiting for the guys who aren't caught up, right? That way I can continue to innovate. And it leads to some interesting discussions, right? Where somebody will say, well, I need this feature, right? Whatever this feature is, and it's great. But actually, if you ask them, it's not so much the feature, it's the technologies that make up that feature that they really want. And so the feature itself, fully packaged and ready to go, maybe months, 3 months, 4 months out. But the enabling technologies that they really, really want, that might be going out in 6 weeks. It's just that there may not be an easy way to consume it, right? But you can trade off some of this ease of use for early availability.
So you've got somebody who is in fact developing with the platform at level A, and is in fact finding there are missing pieces, so he starts indenting technology to replace missing functionality, to only discover that you've done the same thing a week later, and so he's wasted money. So the discoverability of this new technology.
Right, and we are working on that. Right, and what you're describing is a classic roadmap problem, and even this again when we change. There's all these downstream effects, right? Everybody says, well, we really want to see more features more often. Okay, that's great in the abstract, but the trade-off is how do we keep track? How do we keep everybody up to date? How do we maintain a communications channel?
Existing software.
How do we not break? How do we avoid wasted effort, right? All of these things are these downstream effects of what, in the abstract, seems to be this brilliant idea, and it's a new way of doing things.